In the last episode of Pinball, Noelle Say-Levy found herself in the world beneath her own, a place known to its occupants as the Filter Plate. With the help of Byleth, a separate consciousness alive within her own, Noelle learned to command her innate abilities to unpack the soundscape of reality. Now able to traverse the two worlds, Noelle first returned herself to her own, the stationary plate, only to discover that she'd been gone for more than a year and a half. Upon arrival, she was tracked by Saigo Satagiri, Mick Strings, and their new cohort, April S. The party of strangers has regrouped with a new mission: collect the infant Neuro from the clutches of the Ace of Cups. Conversation between the two Cambion fizzled out much like the first campfire. After an hour, Noelle found herself alone then, without the need to sleep. It was inherent in the air quotes immortal to persist. Mick found both the time and the ability to get in a kip beside the second campfire, which used the real firewood collected by Saigo and April. So, whilst the King of Things snored and kicked at the dirt like a dog, Noelle continued with her self-imposed training. Byleth believed their synchronization to be as good as they could ask for, but it didn't feel any different. By now, she was all but done with any kind of meditation. She still didn't worry, she still didn't feel powerful. She supposed that because she didn't worry, she also didn't feel any particular confidence in herself. She had a goal, sure, but she lacked, not motivation per se, ambition was more like it. All that remained was necessity. She needed to know how long it took to traverse the plates. If she had to escape again, say during their next scheduled confrontation with the Ace of Cups, would she return only to find corpses? Practice makes progress, only it couldn't be done alone. Saigo was off on her own not too far from the pack. That said, there was enough space between them to make it difficult but not impossible to distinguish her minute, crouched movements. She might have been picking at the dirt, looking for bugs, or she could have been tying her shoelaces. It marked the peak effectiveness of her sixth sense at 3.5 meters, estimated as she walked the length, tip to heel, before asking for the loner's assistance in the matter. Saigo wasn't a sleeper either, for Cambion do not dream, ever, and since their bodies regenerate apropos of nothing, sleep was redundant, tantamount to time travel, even, and Saigo had no need for time travel. With Neuro, she had seen the immediate future, and it was bleak. It did not take much convincing for Saigo to agree, just the offer of being more than dead weight. Student and teacher left April, who was grazing for little to no reason, and Mick, who was dozing perhaps an inch too close to the fire. It took a few minutes of puzzled directing, pausing, and going on a heading before the two could choose a spot close enough that suited their shared specific requirements. Noelle needed it to be flat, straight, and long, like a road, but it couldn't be paved like a road. If it's paved, it's patrolled, said the teacher. Additionally, Saigo required the area to be somewhat discreet, preferably covered, so as to not draw too much attention. Fair. After all, they'd spent half a year plotting a surprise attack, and while Saigo was impressed that Noelle believed she could aid them, she had no strong feelings toward the thought of Noelle disappearing, if that was easier. They chose a spot in what appeared to lead onto a rainforest, where even the skin-tightening midnight air had been thickened by the scent of eucalyptus drifting in from the west. Now, presuming her mentor had been hiding a digital watch, or had a rudimentary understanding of the stars in relation to the rotation of the Earth, Noelle's methodology was relatively simple. She would pull herself into the filter plate, take a set number of steps, and Saigo would measure the result. Taking up position side by side, Noelle concentrated and fell forwards into that other world, where there was no nighttime. It was temperate there, and almost more comfortable. It took her by surprise how easy traversing the separate dimensions had become. A few seconds of the stalled time passed as she sought to collect herself and found no need to. In fact, it was Byleth who spoke up and reminded her that she was currently on the clock. To measure, she took what she could only describe as the exact length of a single step, and at the end of it, returned with similar ease. With that, she all but considered the technique mastered. Hardly did Noelle show any interest in the third and final melody, stretching out amongst the universe's music. It almost seemed to disappear into the back of her head. She had decided that 2 whole worlds were more than enough for her. Saigo had to stand once Noelle returned, which wasn't a great sign. With intense concentration, Saigo paced towards her new position and counted aloud as she did so. 1 step in the filter plate equaled 8 steps in their world. "You were gone for 15 minutes, said Saigo. "Did you get lost?" To that, Byleth stirred. 15 minutes was by no means an accurate conversion rate, nor did it stand up to the test of repeated experimentation. Space remained consistent, always. 3 steps became 24, a leap became a launch. Time, however, was fickle. It seemed to squash and stretch as she moved along through its distant cousin. See, simply blipping from plate to plate could chip off anywhere from 3 seconds to 5 minutes, rendering her redundant in any high-octane matters. To her, it felt almost instantaneous by the 19th blip, and still, the result was that time was indifferent to her will. Noelle slumped and blew away drips of blood with a raspberry. It seemed as though she would not be able to fulfill the half-formed promise of purpose. Almost angrily, she snapped, "Did you know that I was blind when you rescued me?" "Yes," said Saigo, "I knew." "Then why? With all due respect, I appreciate it, but surely I'm doing you a disservice." She approached and crouched to Noelle's level. "Not at all," said the soldier. "You were around for half of 1 day and then you were gone for nearly 2 years. If anything, we are glad to know that you did not die." Stunned, Noelle could only wipe her face off with her sleeve. Saigo was so close to her now that she could feel the waves her remnant gave off, like a big cat purring, or rather, a grown man's impression of that sound. Her nose soon stopped flowing. It was almost time to try again. She wanted an answer first. "Why?" she repeated. "You already had a baby to look after. Why bother?" "I felt bad for you," she said. It was as simple as that, an act of goodwill. Saigo took a moment to mull over the facts, sort and place her thoughts in a more digestible format. "I was there," she came out with, "when you took your first breath." "I don't remember that," said Noelle. "Do you remember anything?" "Fair point," she shot back. "Continue." "You and I," said Saigo, "we're connected, in the same way that Mick and I are connected. Less thoroughly, of course, but it's the truth. You were born the same as us, a member of the Father's personal guard. You, Noelle, were born to be the Envy." "These fucking naming conventions," she cursed beneath her breath. "Am I supposed to know why I deserved that nickname?" Mick had explained Saigo's connection to her name, of course, but Envy? For a heartbeat, Noelle's irritation peaked, and she felt red in the face. But after that beat passed, she was back to normal, calm, collected, clueless. "You know what's weird?" she said. "As soon as I woke up, I knew my name. Isn't that weird? Of all things." "We are the sum of many parts," said Saigo, reiterating Mick's earlier revelation of their animate construction. "I have always been able to remember the life of the original Saigo Satagiri. She taught secondary school. During my tenure as the Gluttony, I have always fought against the instinct that has come with it. It was witnessing the birth of Neuro that triggered my conscience." Noelle said nothing. For a moment, she thought to stand up and blip over to the filter plate to collect herself. But she couldn't do that without risking a week. "We really are freaks, huh?" is what broke the silence. The words passed through her lips without any dental resistance, like any other pleasant conversation starter. Her brain handled the phrase the same way it might handle the words in a novel, as an adjacent bit that simply could not have happened to her, despite all the available evidence. She didn't dilly-dally or ask for a response at all. "There's something holding me back," came out in the form of a malaise-heavy fog which rolled out of her like she'd put days into a hobby she just couldn't grasp. A stray hand crept up behind her and landed on the top of her head. Saigo had begun patting her and softly stroking the top of her head as though she were a cat. It wasn't a particularly pleasant sensation, but this felt like one of those moments where the thought counted for more than the action itself. "Believe it or not," said Saigo, "that's the answer. There's something holding me back. It's us now. Us." And And there was that strange momentary lapse in her total absence of emotion, lasting no longer than a blink. A rush of chemicals soon came to remind her of the futility of struggle, and Noelle came to terms with the violence of truth. Acceptance, an instinct that came with a brief but evident delay. It was faulty wiring in her human remnant connection, a simple enough problem to troubleshoot, diagnosis, memory loss. Byleth offered nothing, for they had seen 100 bodies and could not see a fix for this. Saigo Satageri, however, was built for such a situation. She was no longer bound to a contract of eye contact. "Sit down," she told her, leaving little time for Noelle to ask what exactly was happening to her. Simply put, Saigo could not tell Noelle what trauma triggered her rather selective amnesia and hope for the best. It was not as simple as forgetting, as Noelle put it. "I'll sit in front of you," said Saigo, taking position, then placing her hand on Noelle's head again. "If I asked you to clear your mind, would you know what I meant?" "Yes," Noelle nodded, "but it's never very quiet in here." "Do your best," said Saigo, giving the girl another pat. Noelle was cross-legged, but Saigo had chosen to sit on her feet, allowing her to close the distance between them. With greater intent than those who need it, Saigo's breathing became rhythmic, in through the nose, out through the mouth, only stopping to deliver a single line of guided meditation. "Close your eyes and be patient. Breathe as I do, and choose a breath that reflects the serenity that you envisage." And then she went back to breathing. Saigo removed her gloves. She was closer now, so close eventually that they were sharing only a small amount of the earthly oxygen, which only got warmer each time it was passed between lungs. Noelle did her best. Her lungs did not process the air anymore, so no matter how long she held her breath on the inhale, she didn't get at all lightheaded. As soon as she put two thoughts to it, breathing ceased to make sense as an automatic process. It became so difficult to breathe, after a while, that it was all she could think about. And moments after, the connection was made. To Noelle, the inside of her own mind was almost unfamiliar. It was silent, for one thing. The absence of the universal soundscape hung somewhere between the most uncomfortable sensation her subconscious had ever experienced, and ultimately peaceful. It didn't feel very large in there, as offensive as that may have seemed. Saigo was there, and she was taking up much more space than she usually did. With that sixth sense of hers, Noelle could feel Saigo, or at least her remnant, in much higher definition than she could in any real world. It rather definitively told her that it was shaped like a big cat with a man's head, and for once, Noelle felt blessed. "Are you real?" she asked, just in case. She felt off guard and unreasonably alone for somebody in a shared space. Strangely, the figure reacted first with shock. "Oh," said Saigo, "I assumed I was alone in here." "What does it look like to you?" asked Noelle. She shrugged. "Doesn't. It's dark," said Saigo. "It's your Roman room. Why would it?" She'd said it in the least accusatory way, but it, for sure, didn't come off like that. "Do you know where we are?" Noelle paused, sniffed at the air, and noticed that it was cool, almost refrigerated. It was being blown in from somewhere else. It might have been fresh air once, but she could now smell stale blood on it. She noticed she was sitting, not standing, and it was a bed, not a chair. "I think we're in my cell. I suppose I was in a cell at some point." "We rescued you," said Saigo, "from a cell. Thank you for pausing." "I'm having trouble concentrating," said Saigo, stepping through the darkness. "Usually, I am alone in places like this. If I remember correctly, there's a window here." "A window?" Something sparked something else. A chain reaction happening in the back of her head, where her spinal cord plugged in. Green hair. She could see it, hung over the vision of a mosaic-reinforced window. It lasted for approximately one frightened gulp. Black again, of course. It was only a memory. All three noises returned, carried into the room by the musical cat. Noelle could pick up on Byleth's purring as they entered from behind Saigo, passed through her legs, and arrived atop the bed beside her. "Can she hear that?" she asked Byleth. "Can you hear that?" she repeated. "It's the sound of the universe. Isn't it grating? I hear it all the time, even when other people are speaking." Saigo didn't confirm. She just took another step closer. Byleth did not appreciate the sudden movement, and as a result, Noelle felt the briefest adrenaline surge a person has ever felt. Saigo stopped, so she must have felt it too. "I can't hurt you," she said, "even if I wanted to. I'm only a guest in your head. I can't even suggest something. I'm only here to look." "Good luck with that," snarked Noelle. "No, I've seen enough." "Believe it or not, there is something holding the two of you back," she explained. Byleth's music continued to emanate from them, but the purring stopped. "Byleth doesn't think that you're strong enough," she continued, "to face the truth of your blindness." "You already told me the truth," said Noelle. "You told me that I rejected you and..." It was the collision of two simultaneous events that brought Noelle's sentence to a grinding halt. In awe, she was dropped to her knees as a great pike of hurt rammed itself into the apex of her skull, right down to the nape of her neck, as though it was following some cerebral structure. As this happened, Saigo Satagiri was booted from her mindscape, not by choice. Neither Noelle nor Byleth had made a move against her. It was as though she was projected from her standing position by a powerful blow, and she broke straight through the walls. A swell developed in the abscess of her eye sockets, and it soon grew too large to be contained, stretching and breaking the bone. No amount of scraping and clawing at her own flesh would slow it down. She could hardly tell if she was getting through the skin, even.
"I have waited,"
spoke the swelling on a direct line to her brainstem.
"There is no more time. As we dawdle and deliberate, your body lays at risk. Will you face up to weakness? Do you wish to learn the truth?"
It boomed.
"Wish, and we will make it so. March onward to the empty."
She writhed among these words, which came from her own imagined form, squirming, desperate to feel the vessels in her face burst, for some pressure to lift off when the blood spurts and trickles down her fingertips like floodwater. If she did it, she could accept the numbness. Numbness would come after the pain, as it had done before. And then just like that, Noelle no longer hurt. She had rejected Byleth, and now she could remember how she had rejected them. She could remember how they'd woken from what felt like the sweetest dream. A simple day at school, with a girl and a boy, both had very kind faces. She could remember how she woke in a room of mirrors and lights. How she knew that she was being watched from minute one because she could see right through the painted glass. How she could make out monsters in their shadows. How she knew their exact chemical compositions. How she could see their voices in grand, thick shapes. How she saw the molecules of water in the air like swarms of screaming insects. How she saw time itself leave a celestial trail behind the movement of all things. Noelle did it with her own fingers before anybody could stop or restrain her, before anybody could even enter the room. When offered the immeasurable scope of the universal machinations, Noelle Salevi chose nothingness over everything. She pushed and pierced the soft flesh of her eyeballs. They popped, and it was agonizing. The fluid which ran over her knuckles was warm, but it did not feel as thick as blood. For a moment, she thought she might drown in it, and then all went calm, and all went quiet. She could not recall much more than that, for there was nothing more to remember. Just that girl, and that boy, whom she'd dreamt of for the longest time, and then never again, after Saigo Satagiri and mixed strings intervened in her dreaming. "You were protecting me," Noelle said to the cat, "but I'm not afraid anymore. I understand. I'm not the host you wanted. I threw away your gift because I couldn't comprehend it. Honestly, I don't have use for that sort of thing. I'm not a fighter. I would never have been able to do what they do." Noelle stood to her feet again. The swelling had disappeared, or it had never been there in the first place. Byleth, the cat, stood too, their heavy stare focused straight on their host. "I am grateful to Saigo, and to Mick, as I am grateful to you. It was them who woke me up, despite literally being built to destroy. They took pity on me. I'm like a broken machine," she said, as she extended a hand to Byleth. "But I know what I have to do to help them, and I want to make a deal." You have been listening to Pinball, Measure 3, Fermata, written and directed by Jake Lucy. This production is copyright 2021 by the Sleepy Bones Detective Agency. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, is purely coincidental. If you'd like to support the show, please visit us at patreon.com/sbda.